Privet, Katila, Wandering desu, and today this is the weekly Russo-Ukrainian War weekly update for the week of September 18th through the 24th. So today like last week, there's been a kind of reduction in intensity of clashes. However, there are still clashes along the front. It is not static. There are still clashes along the front. However, they are not as intense as they were over the summer. But there has still been some updates for this week that I want to update you guys about. So let's begin again, as usual, on the main area of Ukrainian attacks on the Robotyne front. So, what to talk about this area? So, according to recent geolocated footage, the Ukrainians actually managed to. There was a geolocated footage of a battle between a Russian soldier and two Ukrainians, I think around here, and the Russian soldier killed both of them. And now, according to some shelling from the Ukrainian side, they've been shelling like this area right here to shell where the Russians were going through the trenches. And so, so obviously that means the Ukrainians were pushed back from here. So basically, now, the thing to talk about here is that the Ukrainians made multiple attacks towards Novopokrovka here. And that means basically, now according to this map, they've kind of advanced right to the edge of the town. A lot of Russian mappers say they've only advanced up to this kind of like right here in this bottom line here, in this forest plantation, as they call it. And so there's been these battles in this zone. It's a bit of a fog of war because we don't know exactly where the Russians and Ukrainians are solidified. This area right here is kind of like a no man's land almost. The Russians are solidified right in the village of Novopokrovka, and the Ukrainians are solidified at the southern edge of Robotyne. But beyond that, that's probably where maybe there's Russian Ukrainian troops, but they're battling out and things change every single day. Well, maybe not every single day. Well, maybe even every single day. Who knows? But basically, there's been battles in these areas. Basically, Ukrainians are trying to get right up close to Novopokrovka to start an assault. Again, that's actually also why on this front, the Ukrainians have been actually stopped. They've been attacking towards trying to get into Verbova as much as they can. However, they have actually been trying to start doing attacks towards this hilltop. This is, as you can see in this area here, this area is a bit of a high ground here. We can see on the Rybar map here, as you can see, these are where the high point hills are. So the Ukrainians have been trying to attack here. What's the purpose of this? I think twofold, actually. They want to break through here so that then they could attack Novopokrovka not just directly, but also from the side. If they could attack the Novopokrovka from two sides, they hope to squeeze the Russians out of this position. Another thing, which is a bit more far-fetched, but hopefully what they want to do is some breakthrough, is they want to break through here and cut the main highway that connects Tokmak to Polodny here. So these are two vital Russian cities right here. And so maybe they're trying to reach this strategic point of, I don't even know how to pronounce that. So try to kind of wedge between here. Now again, as I mentioned in previous videos, they've been trying, they can't go too deep, because again, they need to clear out the sides here. They need to take out Kopany, flatten this here. They need to take Verbova and flatten the flanks here, so that then they could have a solidified position, so that they could then break through the first Russian defense line. And then once they do, they could then start trying to attack the second Russian defense line, which includes the city of Tokmak, which is the strategic objective of the Ukrainian forces. Honestly, I do not think they'll be able to take Tokmak in this offensive, at least, and they'll have to restart it either in winter or maybe next summer when they reorganize their forces. So I'm thinking that actually right now their main purpose is trying to solidify this area here, and so that they could be able to then restart operations later. So that means taking Verbova, Kopany, and maybe Novopokrovka, and just trying to solidify themselves here. Because there is, this grinding, that's how, that obviously the goal is Tokmak, but, they won't be able to keep grinding, at the level of losses they've been sustaining. They'll have to take a break for a few months until also the weather's getting worse for them. So that's basically what's been happening here. The Ukrainians have launched attacks and have kind of gained some ground at the bottom of Robotyne. The Russians still hold Novopokrovka. Well, actually, the entire village is still under Russian control, but the areas between Robotyne and Novopokrovka are in this fog of war between the Russian Ukrainian forces, which have been battling this week. Same thing with Verbal, which is under complete Russian control still, but the Ukrainians have been trying to lunge themselves in these plantations on the side and in front of it, and that is trying to get as close as they can to actually reach into it. But the Russians have been battling them and counterattacking as well. So that's what's been happening in the Eureka front. Let us go to kind of the twin sister part of the front here in the Velika Novoselica line. This actually has, I'm just trying to say what's happening here. There's actually not been much here. As we mentioned last week, there was an attack on Novodonetsk and Novomayorska. Basically, we got a confirmation that basically the Russians reclaimed all the land around Novomayorska, and the Ukrainians had to basically retreat back to these two settlements here. The Russians still attack the Ukrainians on these two villages here, and the Russians still hold Pernutia. So basically, the Ukrainians are trying to basically attack the flanks so that they could attack the main goal of this operation, which is to take Staromilivka here. That is kind of the goal of the operation. But again, they haven't been able to actually break through the flanks here, and they actually really didn't try that much this week. So that's basically what's happened in that front. Nothing much, but just kind of there's been some clearing operations, kind of, and all that rotating. In terms of the Donetsk front itself, nothing much. On the Bakhmut front, there's been actually some solidification. Now, last week, as we talked about how the Ukrainians managed to break through in Klishivka, or take Klishivka and Andriivka. These places are basically under Ukrainian control. And the Russians have basically reestablished their defense line along the rail line here, and along Kurdumovka and Zelinovka here. So again, now the Ukrainians might prefer, like, okay, we took the two villages, we got some success, we could solidify here and just wait for the Russians to, and then just kind of call it quits, or they could wait a few weeks, replenish their troops and go on the attack again. With that being said, it's a matter of do they want to continue breaking through here, and how good Russian defenses are. If they're good, then it's going to take a long slog. Remember, the battle for Klishivka and Andriivka, which the Ukrainians finally took last week, took like 4 months, well, 3 months or so, but almost 4 months, and so that took a lot of effort, and to continue, it's going to take more effort to not as much effort at least to try to take these villages here to cut off the southern part, to finish the southern flank of Bakhmut. That being said, in order to actually complete their main operation, which is take Bakhmut, which actually Zelensky directly said is one of their main cities they want to take back for whatever reason, I do not know. They basically they have to attack the north, and that's basically what a lot of people have been saying, is that they're going to attack in the north, and that's basically where they're going to do the next push. And I think maybe that might be what they do. Pushing to open and also is fine and all, but it doesn't really help much if they don't take Dubulova, Zilizanskia, Berfovka, and Parastorivka, and try to cut off the northern grouping here, or cut off the northern sector of Bakhmut. With that being said, so they might actually stop trying to attack here, solidify here, and then send its assault forces up north to try to attack here. There's actually some news as I've been talking, and this might just be hearsay, that the Russians attacked here in Orekhovy-Vasilivka and actually managed to capture the settlement. It's very elongated, so I actually kind of doubt it, but I think maybe there was some local operations. Maybe they captured this trench line, like this tree line or something like that. Again, the more space the Russians have here, the more Ukraine has to grind through to, achieve their objectives here. So again, they're trying to take Bakhmut for. Now you might be wondering what's the reason. There's really not a really good reason. It's actually, even the United States people are saying that's kind of baffling why the Ukrainians are putting so much effort in Bakhmut, which has no really strategic objective. But maybe it's because they put it's like a sunk cost thing. They put so much effort in Bakhmut, they want to take it back. It could be a morale thing as well, because Bakhmut and its surrounding villages have been the major Russian advance since the since last summer, so over a year. So besides Bakhmut, Russia hasn't really gained anything in the last year. So taking Bakhmut back and taking the villages that what they gained in their last offensive here is going to be a big blow for morale. But again, that's if they could do it. Again, they took 2 villages after a few months, but it's going to take a lot more for them to continue that operation. Um, in terms of the other fronts, there's been no movement in the Siversk front and the Lamand front, not really. And the only thing on the Kupins front to kind of make a little note of is that in the village of Sinkovka here, there's been kind of back and forth in this area. Again, the Russians have been trying to take this village, because taking it and this field, the forest line here next to the Osko River means then they could actually continue attacking towards the suburbs of Kupinsk, which is the main Russian objective here. However, recent geolocated footage shows the Ukrainians are still in the town, and because the Russians have been shelling the center of the town. So basically, the Ukrainians basically have control of this village still, but the Russians are still attacking it. But there's been no major changes on, at least on what I call the Luhansk front. I don't really separate these fronts, but this area here, there hasn't been really any big changes this week. What else? On the Kherson front, there's actually again there's been most of these battles are over the Dnieper Islands. Again, like I mentioned last week, the purposes of these attacks here are to tie down Russian forces. Now, there's been some interesting news coming out from Rybar. By the way, before I continue, here are some I showed. So here's what Rybar has been talking about with the Velika Novosokol line and the Bakhmut front here. So this is kind of like the Russian perspective. Now, in terms of Kherson, Rybar actually made a very good point here, or he kind of talks about. So what happened was that a lot of the Marine battalions that were actually fighting in the Velika Novosolica line, which were the main assault units here, they actually got rotated out and sent to Kherson. And with a total of about 7,000 troops total have been rotated there in the last few days. And that's actually why there's been a reduction in intensity here. Along with this, there's been dozens of infantry fighting vehicles and tanks that have been sent here. And here's my opinion. I think, so right now, in terms of what's in this weekly update, in terms of what's happening, obviously I'm not talking about what happened. But, in terms of what actually happened, not very much. There's just been some battles along these islands here, which are, the Ukrainians have been trying to, are getting a foothold here. They have also, just along these islands, they've been trying to solidify themselves here. The Russians have also been bombarding the Kherson front here, especially on this area right here. And so, because of that, and because of, these, the transfer of units here, and actually not only that, Ukrainians have created 2 assault kind of groups from the brigades they have in this region. They've called them Normandy and Omaha, and the LARP is out of control. Now, besides the LARP being out of control, this shows that besides creating these assault formations, redeploying thousands of troops here, along with dozens of vehicles, along with these attacks in Crimea, which included a bombing of the naval base in Sevastopol, and along with that, those naval attacks that happened 2 weeks ago, I believe, along with just regular drone attacks here. We could see that I think the Ukrainians are going to launch an offensive here. Now, what's the purpose? I think, is to probably, number one, is to probably try to divert troops from Zaporozhye here. If they manage to capture a few of these villages on the coast here, and maybe have a small bridgehead here, all they need, I think maybe the goal is to drive, say, oh, there's a bridgehead here. Let me draw troops from here to plug it, and then the Ukrainians will have an easier time breaking through their main objective in Zaporozhye. Now, if they're trying to be bold, now this would require a complete collapse of the Russian defenses in Kherson, right? So this might be in case that happens, is that then they collapse this front, the Russians have to withdraw to Crimea, and to maybe to here or something like that, so whatever defenses are here, and that way the Ukrainians could attack on 2 sides here and break the Russian defenses in Takhmat immediately, or not immediately, but it'll be a lot easier to break it. But I think the main purpose of this is not to make that big, because again, if they don't collapse the Russian Kherson front, then basically they'll have the exact problem the Russians had when they were on the other side of Kherson, which is they have no way to supply their troops because their bridges are completely keep getting blown up, and their supply situation is completely untenable. This is why every time the Ukrainians have actually landed, like they've landed here before, and all that, they've just kind of they've not been able to stay there for long. And wherever they have landed on these islands, it's like small groups of a couple dozen people who could be, since the supply route is right there, they could, before the Russians could bomb their platoon bridge, they don't even need, since it's just a few dozen, they just need small motorboats of supplies to send supplies here to maintain a small bridgehead here. But again, they can't expand it. So again, but again, with enough troops and some, which is what they're trying to create here, I think they're trying to basically just intensify the main purpose of this front for the Ukrainians, which is basically to divert Russian troops here from the main axis of attack in Zaporozhye. So that's what I think they're going to do. But in terms of what actually happened, there's just been some battles on the islands with some back and forth in terms of who's getting who on which islands. Anything else? There's also been intensifying of missile campaigns. The Russians have basically restarted their missile campaign. There's been basically 8 days in a row. This entire week, every day they basically been attacking Ukrainian facilities, manpower, and so forth. They bombed a tank production factory or repair facility in Kharkov. They bombed a foreign mercenary hotel hosting foreign mercenaries in Cherkasky. They bombed an armored vehicle factory in Kiev. They bombed electricity or energy facilities in Ravine and Lvov. They've bombed grain infrastructure in Izmail, Odessa, and so forth. They've bombed Dnieper. They bombed a airfield in Kremachuk here. The Ukrainians are also bombing, as I mentioned, in Crimea. So there has actually been an intensification of missile strikes all across Ukraine. Along with this, there's been an intensification of guided bomb attacks. The usage of FPV drones have gone up. So again, Russia is showing its industrial might being used. And, is that just because, is Russia preparing an offensive? Or is it just like Russia's like, oh, we have more, more equipment, we can now use it more, and to continue damage Ukraine in the back? Who knows? So there's been that. There's also been the Zelensky met with the United Nations in New York. They talked about he basically talked about why Russia is bad. He also went to Washington to plead with people to get more weapons, and he did get another $300 million package. However, it didn't include his long range missiles that he wanted. But there's been kind of and then Biden later said, oh, there's some rumors that he actually said he would bring it, but then they walked it back. So we don't really know the situation with those long-range missiles. He also visited Canada. So Ukraine's still going to get, obviously there's been a big disappointment of how this counteroffensive went. By now they should have basically broken this, and they should have been sieging Crimea by now. However, that obviously didn't happen. They basically barely moved at all. They haven't actually operationally achieved much here. Now, with that being said, the Western countries are still going to give Ukraine more weapons in terms of kind of to maintain it. They don't want to completely cut Ukraine off, but in terms of big weapons packages that we saw like last winter, that's probably not going to happen, especially at that scale. So that's what happened. Again, a little bit, not as intense, not as much big changes on the ground as we saw last week. Or like last week, we didn't see as much changes. But as you can see, there's still been battles. There's still clashes trying to improve the situation, trying to see if finally they found the one side attrition so much they could finally break through. And so clashes are still ongoing, but the intensity has reduced. But I have a feeling that we're gonna see more a restart of more intense clashes probably in the next later. But in terms of what happened last week, just been some clashes, some changes, but not as much. The Ukrainians are throwing their last I called it the Zelensky Schlacht because this is Zelensky's battle or offensive. Schlacht means battle in German, but Zelensky's battle here in Zaporozhye. He needs this battle to get, in terms of getting aid. So it is a military strategy, even if you might say, well, it's too risky to waste all our strategic reserves and all our units to try to even try to make some hope of breaking it through these defense lines. And but again, it's a military. They need, if the West just cuts them off completely, the Ukrainians are doomed. And so, that's it. That they need to maintain that. In order to do that, they need to basically give like a dance for the Western powers. So like, hey, we could actually take back land. So they will continue attacking, and the main goal is to take Tokmak, so that once they take it, they could get a big weapons boost. They could basically let them finish the job here. That is the goal. So yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this, and if you like my other videos as well. So aim high, wander on, from America, with Russian love.